The storm didn't arrive so much as gather, coiling itself among the pines until the trees breathed with it. Mira had learned the forest's moods. This was no ordinary squall. Wind probed the eaves of her old stone cottage, tested the shutters, sighed under the door as if the night itself wanted in. She set another log on the hearth, told herself the world could rage all it liked out there. In here she had her tea, her tools, her quiet routine stitched like small, neat seams around each hour. Solitude hadn't been a punishment for her, it was a bargain. The village had barbed tongues, her family had vanished into their own lives, and the packs that sometimes roamed the ridge had made it clear she didn't belong under any banner. Alone was honest. Alone didn't lie. The first knock shook the crockery on the shelf. She froze, cup halfway to her mouth. No one came this far up the north road in weather like this. The knock came again, patient, deliberate, a measured beat that placed itself against her ribs. Mira slid the iron latch, lifted the poker out of habit, and called through the wood. "State your purpose." A voice answered, not loud, but carrying the kind of authority that made the doorframe feel narrower. "I seek shelter. I offer oath for the night." When she unbarred the door, the storm tried to shove past a tall figure cloaked in drenched black. He stood without stepping over the threshold, as if the invisible line mattered. Lightning washed his face bone pale. His eyes were an old embered red, steady but dulled by pain. Blood had bloomed through his shirt in a slow, rain-thin blossom. "Name," Mira said, because names were rules, and rules had kept her alive. "Cashin Vale," he said. "High Sovereign of the Nocturne Court." The title landed between them like a blade in a table. He didn't reach for it. He simply added, quieter, "Hunted. Wounded. I will bring no harm under your roof. By my house and line I swear it." Every story she'd ever heard said to slam the door. Instead she measured his stance, the quiver in his hand that he hid by tightening it into a fist, the way he waited for permission rather than taking it. Against her better judgment, against every wall she'd built, Mira stepped back. "Enter. And don't bleed on the quilt." He crossed the threshold with the careful grace of a predator trying not to startle a bird. The air shifted. Her little room filled with a presence like night pressed into a man's shape, and something ancient that recognized her even if she didn't recognize it back. Cashin's cloak hit the floor with the sound of a river poured out of a bucket. Under it, his shirt was slashed in 3 long arcs, the edges of the wounds darkened as if shadow had been poured into them. Not normal blood, then. Not a normal blade. Mira set the poker aside, boiled water, crushed yarrow and anise with the flat of a spoon. He watched her the way hawks watch mice, not hungry, but impossibly attentive. "Hunters?" she asked, dampening a cloth. "The Ember Wardens," he said, as if naming a winter. "Men who set fires and call it cleansing. Their steel is tempered in salt and sung over by frightened priests. It slows our mending." He didn't flinch when she pressed the cloth to his side, but his breath miscounted for a beat. "You've no sigils here," he added, gaze ticking over her beams, her shelves, her hearth. "No pack markers. No parish charms. I followed a path that was missing you. That's supposed to be a compliment?" Mira muttered, cutting away the shirt with careful, practical snips. He huffed a laugh that was almost human, then went still under her hands. The skin tried to knit, and then failed, as if a stubborn memory kept the wound open. "Why my door?" she asked. "Because it is not part of any ledger," he said. "And because your name is one the woods keep repeating." Mira's fingers paused. "Woods don't talk." "They do to us," Cashin said, and in the pause after, thunder placed a period on his claim. He must have seen the way she half believed despite herself. Amusement warmed the furthest edges of his eyes. "Mira of the North Road," he added softly, surprising her so thoroughly she nearly dropped the bandage. "Mira who left the village quilt unfinished. Mira who pruned the birches the way old women do, cutting to make growth kinder." "Stop," she whispered, more to the churn in her chest than to him. He did. He let her work. When at last the bleeding slowed and the poultice lay like a night-colored flower on his ribs, He sat back in the chair as if he'd been lowered there by the house itself. The fire found his face and had the decency to keep its distance. "Thank you," he said. No king in the words, only a man paying a debt correctly. "You're safe here," Mira said, and heard how foreign that sounded in her mouth. She'd never promised safety to anyone. She'd promised distance. Still, she meant it. And the storm leaned its head to the window and listened. Morning softened the world to pewter. The storm had rinsed the air so clean the pines smelled new. Mira woke on the chair with a blanket she didn't remember pulling over herself. Cashin had risen before her. He stood at the window, pale as the light, the cut of his shoulder angled in attention. For a heartbeat it looked like a painting of a saint reconsidering faith. "You heal fast," she said, startled by her own voice. "Not as fast as pride would prefer." His eyes shifted from the trees to her. "They will test the road at noon. They know how far an injured sovereign can limp." "The wardens?" She tucked hair behind her ear, suddenly very aware of the soft domesticity of the room around all that iron in his posture. He nodded. "They claim they hunt monsters. They forget what men become when given fire and forgiveness at the same time." Mira should have told him to leave. That her walls weren't made for wars. Instead, she took down the small cedar box she had never explained to anyone. Inside lay lengths of chalk, a coil of twine, 3 pins of blackthorn, a coin she had never spent because every time she tried, it burned her palm. She squatted at the hearth and drew careful lines that were not prayers and not spells but something in between, geometry that turned arrival into permission again and again until the house remembered how to say no. Cashin watched, curiosity prying past exhaustion. "Those are old shapes," he murmured. "Older than my court. I keep a few older than my temper," she said, and felt his faint smile even without looking. When she finished, she wiped chalk dust on her apron and finally asked the question she'd been avoiding. "Why was my name in the trees?" "Because you're not empty the way you pretend," he said simply. "Because something in you shines the way a coal does under ash. That's poetic for a man dripping on my floor. That's honest for a woman who opened the door." Silence folded neatly between them. A jay announced noon before the clock could get around to it. Mira flexed her hands once. "If they come, we make them use their voices before their blades," she said. "And if they use their blades first? Then I stop asking permission," Cashin replied, not unkindly. He reached for the latch and didn't lift it. "Mira," he added, tasting her name as if adjusting its weight. "Stand behind me if you wish. Stand with me if you can." The option was a kindness. She surprised them both by choosing the second. They came like unlit torches, 3 men in ash gray, wet cloaks dragging rain toward her clean threshold. The sigil burned into their pauldron leather was a stylized flame set in a circle of thorns. The leader's beard was trimmed like a law. He smiled the way officials do when they've already signed your fate. "By decree of the Ember Wardens," he intoned, "we claim the thing you harbor." "Language," Mira said mildly. "You're in a house." That knocked his cadence half a step out of rhythm. His gaze slid to her chalkwork and then to the vampire at her shoulder. "Cashin Vale," he said, as if savoring the syllables. "Records say you prefer marble halls." "Records rarely write about weather," Cashin said. He hadn't moved, but the room had decided where its edges were, and it put him on all of them. "Hand him over, woman," the warden said to Mira, kindness varnished over command. "You've no stake in this." Mira thought of the quilt she'd left unfinished, of the bird she'd cut to save the other. "Every hearth is a stake," she said. "You don't get to light yours by burning mine." The warden's mouth soured. He gestured, bored of pretense. Steel cleared scabbards. The air went bright as lightning finds a tree. Cashin moved first, impossibly quiet and then not quiet at all, shadow flexed into muscle and decision. The first blade rang off his forearm guard and flew. The second meant nothing because its target had relocated a foot sideways. The third came from Mira, as if cruelty couldn't help itself. She had always been a practical creature. Practical hands can still flare. The thing inside her that had been waiting glowed hot, a coal inhaling. She thrust both palms up and forward, and light, a clear, firm plane of it, thudded into being. The blade kissed it and screamed. Sparks salted the floorboards. The warden staggered, more offended than afraid. "What are you?" he spat. "Busy," she said, breath hitching. Her shield trembled, then steadied like a learned word repeated correctly. Cassion's gaze flicked to her, pride there and a warning braided through it. "Hold," he said, and the word reached whatever newly waking nerve she'd found. She held. When it ended suddenly, 3 men disarmed and pinned by their own momentum, Cassion's knife through the leader's cloak and into the doorframe an inch from bone. The warden's composure cracked, face flush with the future he hadn't accounted for. "This is blasphemy," he hissed. "No," Cassion said, voice gone very old. "This is boundary." He ripped the knife free. The wardens fled, leaving wet footprints that the house drank with a shudder. Mira's shield guttered out. She stood in the hush and tasted metal and new air in her mouth. Cassion turned to her as if to speak gratitude. What passed between them wasn't thanks. It was recognition. By evening, the forest had its ordinary sounds back, but each carried a different gravity. Cassion insisted on scouting the lanes. Mira insisted on food. They compromised. He would walk the yard, she would set bread to the coals and pretend not to notice that he paused under her window twice. When he came in, he looked less like a legend and more like a man who had remembered he could sit. She cut him a slice slick with honey. He ate it like he hadn't been fed right in a century. "You shouldn't stay," she said, because truth demanded to be said even when it hurt her tongue. "They will bring more." "They will," he agreed. "And they will look for me where marble echoes and banners hang. Not here. Your cottage is a silence they cannot map." Mira traced a knuckle along the tabletop grains. "You talk like you know my house." "I know the way refuge feels," he said. "It feels like you." The words put a heat in her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. He let them sit between them, unprodded. "I can call a carriage of shadows and take you to safer ground," he offered at last. "To the nocturne keep. You would be guarded." "Caged," she said without anger. "Guarded," he repeated softly, but he didn't push. She admired him for that and suspected it was also strategy. "There is something else," he added. "What you did today, few mortals hold light without it breaking them. If the warden saw it, word is already on the road. Then I'll learn to do it better," Mira said, surprising herself with how certain she sounded. She'd never chased a gift before. She'd only dodged losses. Cassion inclined his head as if she'd passed an unspoken test. "At dusk tomorrow, if you allow it, I'll teach you how to stand in your own glow without setting the room on fire." A smile touched his mouth, brief and careful. "Consider it a neighborly lesson." "Neighborly," she echoed, amused despite herself. "All right, High Sovereign. At dusk." He rose, intention sheathing him again. "Rest," he said, and it wasn't an order so much as an invitation to treat sleep as a right. When he reached the door, he paused. "Mira," he said without turning, as if the name itself were proper thanks. "You turned an emperor into a guest. That's a power, too." He left her with the softest closing of wood on wood, and the house, pleased by the compliment, settled deeper around her. Dusk came on like a hand dimming a lamp. Mira cleared the table, rolled her shoulders, and stepped into the yard where Cassion waited, boot prints black in the damp earth. He stood with his weight balanced lightly, not coiled. Ready the way rivers are ready to become rapids. "Light is not a weapon," he said, opening the lesson the way a careful teacher opens a door. "It is a truth. Weapons are truths applied at speed." "Sounds like you've practiced telling yourself that," Mira said. "Every century," he answered without pity for himself. "Close your eyes. Find the place where you forgave yourself for opening the door." She did as he asked, skeptical and obedient in equal measure. Somewhere under the sternness she used like armor, under the practical lists, and the small griefs that had taught her to save yarn and nails, There was a warmth that didn't ask to be hoarded. She breathed into it. It breathed back. Now make a circle the size of your breath, Cassian said. Not to keep me out. To keep you inside. She shaped light gently, surprised at how it wanted to be gentle, how it wasn't blinding but lucid. When she opened her eyes, a pale circumference lay on the grass, moon-faint. Cassian stepped to its edge and didn't test it. Good, he said. Pride again, unadorned. Now walk to me without breaking it. She moved. The circle slid with her, an obedient horizon. When she reached him, something in the air between them tightened, a string tuned at last. He didn't touch her. He didn't have to. Wardens break what they fear, he said. Courts cage what they admire. Both are wrong. You will not be project or prize. What will I be? Mira asked softly. Choice, he said. Your own. The word knocked tears into her eyes with the accuracy of an archer. She blinked them back, embarrassed by how much she wanted to set her forehead on his shoulder and steal a minute of quiet from his spine. Instead she breathed, held, released. The circle brightened. The woods approved. A horn sounded then, far off on the south road. Cassian lifted his head. Not wardens, he murmured, listening with a predator's ear. Courtiers. Mine. He glanced at her with something rare, uncertainty. If you'd rather I meet them away from your door. My door holds, Mira said, surprising them both again. Let them see what boundary looks like. He smiled, small, dangerous, pleased. Shadows thickened beyond the gate. Lanterns approached, and with them the politics she had never wanted. Mira squared her shoulders. A cottage can be a keep if the people inside stand like stone. They rode out of shadow the way owls do, present, then undeniable. 3 figures, cloaks the color of midnight about to rain, dismounted at Mira's fence without so much as a clink of spur. The foremost, a woman with hair like hammered silver, went to one knee before Cassian. High Sovereign, she said, voice measured. We found your trail, and the warden's scorch marks beside it. Cassian inclined his head, not softening. Lyra! You'll keep your blade sheathed at this door. Her gaze flicked to Mira, cataloging, apron, chalk-dusted fingers, the ring of pale light underfoot that moved when she shifted her weight. Something like respect sharpened Lyra's posture. Lady, she said to Mira, not quite a question. Mira corrected. Of the North Road in a house that doesn't like visitors. Lyra's mouth tugged, the hinterland of a smile. Behind her, a young courier stared openly, at the circle, at Cassian, at the way the two of them stood near without touching. Word rides the valleys, he blurted, until Lyra's elbow edited him. That the wardens drew steel and were turned aside by light. Words are unruly stock, Cassian said. Tend them. Lyra straightened. We brought a litter, my lord. The nocturne keep is secured. The Ember Wardens took a village 3 nights east, burned sigils into the wells. They're hunting witnesses as much as blood. Mira felt her house tighten around that news. The forest seemed to listen harder. If you leave, she said to Cassian, they'll come back to be sure. And if I stay, I draft your home into a border skirmish. He kept his voice level, but something raw pressed against the words. I will not make your kitchen a war room unless you choose it. Choice. Mira repeated, surprised to hear it steady. She looked at Lyra. What happens to women like me in your halls? Depends who you ask. Lyra said truthfully. Some bow. Some sneer. I'll watch. Mira turned to the circle of light beneath her feet. It had brightened under the weight of decision, the way coals white when you stir them. She stepped forward. It came with her, halo small. Then let them watch me walk in, she said, and learn what a cottage taught me. Cassian's eyes changed, pride warming an older fire. He offered his arm the way emperors do when they remember where they came from. Mira took it, not as a surrender, but as a pact. Traveling by nocturne roads was like taking a sentence through its hidden grammar. The woods parted for Lyra's hand signal. The path rearranged itself under their steps, moss swallowing the noise of boot and litter. Dusk held, refusing full night as if Cashin had asked it to wait. Mira walked without stumbling, surprised at the way her body already understood the without maps way of it. The circle kept pace, a quiet moon in miniature. "Does it tire you?" Cashin asked, low for her alone. "Less than pretending I don't glow," she said, and his soft laugh lived in her for several strides. Behind, the young courier failed at not staring. "Ask," Mira prompted, saving him the inward gnawing. He flushed. "Is it true you held a warden's steel with your hands?" "I held it with not hands," she said. "But yes." Lyra glanced back. "They'll name you," she warned, not unkindly. "Court loves a title. It will lift you when it suits, weigh you when it needs ballast." "I have a name," Mira said. "They can practice using it." The keep revealed itself like a mountain deciding to remember it was a castle. Stone terraces climbed the cliff face, lanterns nested in iron like captive stars. Guards bowed to Cashin, whispers braided through the air as eyes took in Mira's circle, her steady chin, the way the high sovereign did not drop her arm at the threshold like a tool he was finished with. In the great hall, night lived comfortably. Velvet drank the torchlight. On a dais at the far end, a black table glossy as still water waited for council hands. Lyra paused just inside the doors. "Protocol," she murmured. "Later," Cashin said, and the word made the banners stop rustling. He turned to Mira. "Your quarters will be in the East Tower. Stone that remembers morning suits you. Stone that heats in winter suits me," she countered, defensive humor hiding the flutter in her throat. His mouth ticked. He was about to answer when the chamber's far doors opened and a man in scholar's black entered, carrying a book as if it were a negotiable piece. "High Sovereign," the scholar said, bowing. Then, to Mira, with an academic's hunger barely leash, "You shine the old color. I would ask questions." "After she eats," Cashin said, steel sliding under the velvet. "And after she sleeps. And after anyone who plans to name her remembers they serve, not crown." The scholar paled and retreated. Lyra looked openly pleased. Mira, who had weathered 1,000 smaller dismissals without champion, bit the inside of her cheek against gratitude so sharp it scared her. "Stone that heats," Cashin repeated softly, lowering his voice again to something only the circle could hear. "Yes. And windows that look toward the road you chose." He did not touch her. He did not need to. The keep felt it anyway. Sleep wasn't interested in her at first. It stood at the foot of the bed and sorted her day into piles. When it finally climbed under the covers, it brought a dream, a birch grove in winter, light running in the trunks like sap. She woke at dawn with her palms warm, thumbprints bright as if she'd pressed them to stars. The circle waited beside the bed like a patient dog. Lyra was her escort to breakfast. The warrior set a pace meant for someone who could trip and did not trip. "There will be looks," she said. "Let them slide off. If they stick, peel them." "Is that in the guard manual?" Mira asked. "It's in the women's," Lyra answered, humor brief and real. The hall had changed between night and morning, courtiers had multiplied, each draped in an opinion. Mira took bread, cheese, a bowl of something that tasted like roasted dusk. She ate standing, because sitting made it feel like she asked permission. The scholar from last night appeared again, hesitant now, as if he'd swapped boots. "Only one question," he promised, hands visible, palms open. "When your light met Warden Steele, did it ring?" Mira considered. "Like a bell someone struck to warn a village," she said. His face lit, catalogued, and he backed away, ecstatic with data. Lyra snorted. "He will write 3 books and an apology you'll never read." "Let him," Mira said. "I have thicker concerns." As if the keep wanted to oblige, a runner skidded through the doorway, breath shredding. "Wardens on the south escarpment," he rasped. "Not many. Enough to start a rumor." Lyra was already moving. Myra's body chose before her mouth did. "I'm coming." "You owe us no shield," Lyra said, testing for resolve, not caging. I owe myself a practice field, Mira replied. The east tower stairs flew underfoot. The parapet wind wrote unpunctuated sentences against her cheeks. Below, a knot of ashtray advanced with the slow fanatic's confidence of men who think fires are prayers. Cashin stepped to her side as if they'd rehearsed it. They test, he said. We answer in a way that teaches them to dislike questions. Words first, Mira said, finding the coal of calm she'd banked. He nodded. A horn sounded, a clear, contained note that carried down the slope like scents through a crowd. The wardens halted, rearranged, advanced again. Light at ready, Lyra murmured. Light is truth, Mira whispered back, and pressed her palms to the parapet stone. At first, nothing. Then a warmth the size of a bread loaf. She breathed into it. It grew, spread through the stone like tea through wool, found seams older than the keep and filled them until the wall hummed under her hands. The wardens felt it. Men feel when a thing is no longer only itself. Their leader lifted his chin. Abominations, he called, voice trained on sermon steps. Send down the Night Lord. The woman is a stain you will scrub. Mira, to her own surprise, laughed. It came out like a bell, not a shield. You want me so badly, she called back. Because you cannot imagine a woman who refuses to burn. The line wavered. Insults are part of their liturgy, refusals aren't. Cashin didn't hush her. He let the words stand on their boots. You will leave this cliff, he told them, voice carrying without shout. You will carry back a record. The cottage light has a keeper. Knock again and you'll find a door that knows your names. And if we light the forest? One jeered, bravado perfuming fear. Then you'll learn how quickly green becomes glass when truth gets hot enough. Mira said, and pushed. Light spilled down the escarpment, not blinding, not punishing. Clear as river water, firm as a mother's forearm. It didn't strike the men, it struck the ground in front of them, a line drawn with the authority of a midwife. When their boots touched it, the wardens flinched as if a memory had scolded them. The leader pressed forward, testing. His blade touched the light and sounded a small, undeniable chime. Bell, Mira said under her breath, absurdly pleased to have an answer for the scholar. The wardens faltered, not from injury but from something worse, doubt in the story they'd been telling themselves. Their line frayed, then retreated, not in panic but in calculation. They would return with a different paragraph. The horn's echo died. Wind reclaimed the cliff. Mira let the flow subside, panting, palms tingling. Lyra's grin was sharp and beautiful. You didn't wound them, she said. I told the ground to speak, Mira answered. Cashin turned, pride unhidden. And it told them no, he said. Restraint is a rarer power than fury. Keep it. He looked as if he might touch her wrist, then didn't, and the not touch was its own electricity. Eat, he added, practical as any ant. Then the council will want words, and you will give them only as many as your plate would have held. The council chamber drank voices and returned them better behaved. Cashin took the head seat. Mira refused one, choosing to stand at his shoulder like a woman who knew she could sit if she liked. Elders arranged their faces into concern. The scholar hovered at the edge, quill as still as he could make it. We should move the High Sovereign to the winter keep, an elder proposed, rings clicking together, anxious weather. The wardens sent our cliffs. We should move your rings to a quieter hand, Lyra muttered. Mira hid a smile in her sleeve. Wardens test perimeters, Cashin said. We do not run from questions. His gaze tracked the table until men found the grain very interesting. Our concern is not merely their blades. It is why they come with scripture in their mouths. Someone feeds them names. He did not look at Mira when he said it, but the thought scarred the air. From our halls. A murmur. A bristle. The scholar, to his credit, looked sick instead of intrigued. We keep many records, he said. Not all of them loyal. Mira raised her hand and surprised the room into silence. If my name walks the roads in other people's mouths, she said, I will put my feet on the roads myself. Head snapped. Cashin's did not. He watched her as if he were remembering a map he'd once drawn. "Train me," she went on. "Not to dazzle on parapets. To travel. To walk into a village and leave it safer for my steps. That is not," an elder began. "That is exactly rule." Lyra cut across him. "A sovereign who only defends his halls rules furniture. A court that only guards its ceilings crowns dust." Cassion's mouth moved toward a smile before duty arrested it. He rose. "We will form a road cadre," he said. 3 nocturnes sworn by Lyra's standard. A scholar who can read old markers without lecturing to death. And 1 keep warden to answer to Mira when she says a house should be left standing. He held the room's objection with a look. It folded. When the council emptied, quiet laid itself like a shawl. Cassian came down the dais steps to her level, every inch a king who remembered how to be a man. "You spoke as if you've always used rooms like that," he said. "I spoke the way I use my kitchen," Mira answered. "If something doesn't serve, I take it off the table." "What do I serve?" he asked, not teasing. "Choice," she said. His eyes warmed in a way that made the banners want to move without wind. "Training for roads reshapes a body." Lyra took her before dawn to a yard the court forgot. There, stones had been worn to honesty by the feet of women who preferred results to spectacle. "Travel stance," Lyra said, correcting Myra's knees, her breath, her stubborn habit of making herself smaller to be polite to air. "You shrink. The world expands to fill the space. Don't invite it." Mira expanded, a fraction at a time, until her ribs felt like they'd remembered a prelude. The circle answered, widening to an arm's reach, thinning to transparency so it wouldn't catch twigs. They walked with it, then jogged, then ran. By the 3rd lap, sweat salted her lips and a laugh startled out of her. It had been years since her body had been asked to be an instrument instead of furniture. The scholar, whose name proved to be Finn, arrived with maps painted on bark and apologies packed like biscuits. "The old ways avoid bridges," he said, tapping at lines that glanced off rivers like swallows. "Wardens like bridges. They stack men on them and call it courage." "We'll wade then," Mira said. Cassian watched a session from the yard's edge, hands behind his back, not interfering, not leaving. When Lyra dismissed them, he walked Mira to the east tower through a passage lit only by what their eyes could make of the dark. "When I said guarded," he began. "You meant caged," she said lightly, saving him the trouble of the wrong word. "I meant escorted by people who know how to refuse the wrong demands." He stopped at the stair. "You're not a banner for me to raise, Mira. You're the weather that will not be scheduled." "That sounds inconvenient," she said. "For my enemies," he answered, and then, finally, briefly, he did touch her, a brush of knuckles at her wrist that felt like being named by someone who included the middle syllable with care. "Be ready at moonrise," he said. "The road will not wait, and the wardens have learned to read the dusk." Mira climbed the last steps to her room with her pulse drumming a new rhythm, not fear, not even hunger. Anticipation, braided with a tenderness she thought herself too practical to indulge. She packed quietly: bread, twine, chalk, a sewing kit, 3 blackthorn pins, the coin that had never spent. At the last moment, she added a square of the quilt she'd never finished. Not as a regret. As a promise that some things would be finished in the open, under sky. Moonrise stitched silver through the pines as the road cadre assembled at the east gate. Lyra wore travel leathers and a grin that meant trouble would be graded, not avoided. Finn had traded scholar's black for a grey coat with many pockets. Quills stuck out like hedgehog spines. 2 more nocturne joined. Rook, quiet as rope, and Sarah, whose calm had the weight of a cellar door. Cassian arrived last, not armored like a king, but dressed to pass through shadow without argument. He looked at Mira the way a captain checks the horizon. Responsibility, yes, and something steadier under it. They set off at a pace that put thought into the ankles. The nocturne road peeled from the main track and sank into a kind of betweenness, where distance behaved if asked politely. Myra's circle kept easy time. She had packed poorly for sentiment, and well for practice. Still, The quilt square in her satchel felt like a steadying palm between her shoulders. Before midnight they reached the first village, Hereford, a string of houses along a black river, shutters latched tight as teeth. Signs burned into well stones glowed a sullen ember. Warden's work, Finn confirmed, tongue clucking. A sermon hammered into rock, he muttered. Blight dressed as blessing. Lyra signaled silent approach. Cashin did not stride in to be seen. He let the dark carry him to the well. Mira kneeled beside the sigil. Even untrained eyes could read the cruelty. Water forbidden to thee. Tainted. The bucket reserved for penitent men. She laid her palms to the stone. The first press sang pain, truth meeting lie. She breathed, widened the circle until it made a low dome that held only the well mouth, as if cupping a child's ear. Unwrite it, Finn whispered, reverent, terrified. No, Mira said, surprising even herself with the clarity. Tell the older story louder. She traced a simple shape, hospital basin, shared cup, hands washing other hands, and fed light into the groove until the new line outshone the old. The ember code cracked. The air tasted like rain that finally arrives. Somewhere, a shutter unlatched. Cashin's hand hovered near her shoulder and did not touch. Good, he said softly. You didn't erase. You remembered. When the bucket dropped and rose with clean water, Sarah smiled with her eyes. Lyra posted rook at the lane. Dawn would bring questions. Mira washed chalk from her fingers and felt her chest ease as if a strap had been cut. Hereford woke wary, like a dog that wasn't sure the hand was kind. Faces peered, then presented. The first to step forward was a miller missing 2 fingers, grief and competence evenly mixed in his stance. Warden said the river would rot us, he offered, not quite a challenge. The river's been feeding you since before their guild had a name, Mira said, hand on the well, not the man. They carved fear to sell you firewood. She drew a cup, drank, handed it to him across the boundary of doubt. He swallowed. The knot behind his eyes loosened. Word moved faster than carts. Women with pails, boys with questions, elders with silent tests gathered. Finn fielded the talk that required parchment. How to lift a sigil, how to read the seam between piety and policy, while Lyra kept the periphery honest. Cashin stayed where he was most useful, visible enough to tell wolves this flock had teeth, absent enough to leave the choosing to the village. A warden pair arrived late morning, all crisp hems and borrowed righteousness. They saw the cup pass from Myra's hand to a child's and flinched as if witnessing blasphemy had bruised them. Cease, the taller ordered, voice trained on scaffolds. By ember decree, this water is withheld until atonement. Atonement to whom? Mira asked. To the law. His blade hilt gleamed, his eyes tried to. Law is a tool, Cashin said mildly, gaze not on steel but on the child's steady gulp. You've confused it for a god. The warden reached for the cup and met the dome. Light chimed. He stared, offended by physics. Witchcraft. Housekeeping, Mira said. You came in with soot on your boots. I asked the threshold to stay clean. The crowd laughed, a small, dangerous music. The wardens looked to the miller for rescue and found none. In the pause, Sarah stepped between steel and water, posture like a closed book. The pair retreated, less from fear than from the sudden, uncomfortable sense of being a minority report. When they were gone, the village exhaled. A woman pressed bread into Myra's hands with the economy of someone paying debts correctly. We know how to hide, she said. We didn't remember how to stand. Mira met Cashin's glance and, for a heartbeat, allowed herself to be warmed by the proof that a cottage's rule could scale to a road. They left with noon behind them and gratitude in tow. On the outskirts, the river braided into marsh. Finn pointed to a shrine half-sunk, warden's script nailed over the old saint's face. Mira didn't fix it. She removed the nails and let the marsh itself take the board down. Some corrections belonged to weather. 2 nights further, the road angled into Red Bank, a town that wore prosperity like perfume. The market was open, goods stacked high, smiles neatly tied. Underneath, unease ran like a hairline crack in glass. Wardens here didn't preach, they purchased. Their sigil hung discreetly behind the money changer's bench, carved in fine wood. Finn sniffed. Patronage, he said, the word making itself a stain. Cashin dispersed them by twos. No confrontations, he instructed. We are here to listen to the way their fear spends. Lyra and Rook ghosted toward the barracks. Sarah drifted through stalls, eyes on hands, not wares. Finn and Mira took the long way to the square's old water clock. It had been stopped, its bell packed with cloth so time wouldn't ring. That told a story faster than any ledger. They found the story's author in the Guildhall, Magistrate Corvin, a man built of polished oak and performance. He welcomed Cashin with a bow that had practiced in mirrors. High Sovereign! You honor Red Bank. Will you dine? We have venison. And, of course, the gratitude of men who keep their streets clean. Gratitude is best eaten after we know who cooked it, Cashin said, taking the seat that wasn't offered. Mira stood at his shoulder again, and the magistrate's eyes slid to her with the smooth contempt of men who outsource their cruelty. We keep peace, Corvin said. The wardens keep order. Same hymn, different choir. You of all communities should appreciate collaboration. Mira leaned in, voice quiet. Whose hand stuffed the bell? Corvin's smile tightened. Clocks unsettle the poor. They fixate on minutes. Minutes make them think of wages. Wages make them think of value, Mira said. Dangerous. Cashin set two fingers on the table. The room learned the lesson of silence. Your compact with the wardens ends, he said, not as decree but as diagnosis. You can sell venison without selling your wells. You cannot dictate Red Bank's accounts. Corvin snapped, powder showing under the varnish. We are a city of men, not myths. Then stand like one, Lyra said from the doorway, tossing a sack. It spilled coins, each stamped with the warden flame, proof of tithe. Gasps snapped around the hall. Sarah slid in behind, having unquieted the barracks with the simple act of counting bread loaves meant for soldiers who didn't exist. Mira didn't raise her voice. She crossed to the water clock, climbed the half-ladder, and pulled the cloth from the bell. Dust puffed, time coughed awake. The first toll was ugly, the second truer, the third undeniable. Outside, heads turned, the square's heartbeat returning to itself. Corvin blanched. You'll start a riot, he hissed. No, Cashin said. You did. We're starting honesty. When they stepped back into the square, the wardens were already gathering, confused to be losing a place without a sword drawn. Mira set her circle around the clock's base. When men pressed too close, it chimed and did not bruise. Sometimes, she realized, truth only needs ringing. Night took Red Bank personally. Wardens tried scripture. The crowd answered with questions and did not like the answers. No blades yet, moneyed men prefer contracts to scars. But the tension smelled like struck flint. Cashin stood where he could be seen and not surrounded. Lyra arranged bodies as if she were moving furniture for a storm. A warden lieutenant approached, crisp and careful, two legal clerks glued to his flanks. High Sovereign, he said with a bow that granted nothing. Your interference in civil arrangements is noted. The Amber Ward will petition the Crown for redress. Finn brightened. Excellent. We love records. Please also note which wells you forbade women and children from drawing, and how many soldiers you provision that you do not in fact have. The lieutenant ignored him with the skill of practice. We request the woman who manipulates light for examination. Request denied, Cashin said. Exams are for those who study. He glanced at Mira. Demonstrations, however. She understood. Not performance, clarity. She stepped to the fountain at the square's heart, a figure of a heron mid-flight clogged with prayer ribbons and rule plaques. She cut away the plaques, one by one, reading them aloud in a voice everyone could fit inside. No drawing after dusk. Cut. No cup unless escorted by a guildsman. Cut. No water for the fevered. Her hand shook. She cut anyway. Underneath, the heron looked like it might actually lift. Blasphemy, one clerk breathed. Maintenance, Mira said and set her palm to stone. Light did not flare. It soaked into wing and beak an old, forgotten inscription, for all thirst. The fountain coughed, hiccuped, then ran. Clear. Cold. Someone laughed and broke into tears. Someone else dipped and drank and passed the cup to a stranger, and the stranger didn't check their guild pin first. The lieutenant's jaw worked. You think you can undo a network with theatrics? He asked Cashin. I think your network is a theater, Cashin replied. And the audience has found the exits. He didn't draw a blade. He didn't need to. Rook and Sarah had already relocated the warden's crates of donation ledgers to the square's center. Finn opened one, coughed at the dust of hypocrisy, and handed pages to anyone with eyes. Numbers, it turns out, are excellent revolutionaries. As the crowd read its own life back to itself, the wardens pulled away, dignity fraying. Corvin tried to rally them and found himself speaking to men suddenly interested in water. The clock told the hour. No riot. Just a recalibration, the sound a city makes when it remembers its spine. Later, when the square emptied to low talk and broom sweep, Mira sat on the fountain's rim, legs rubber, heart large. Cashin joined without ceremony. For a while they listened to the ordinary miracle of plumbing. You didn't scorch them, he said eventually. Fire is their vocabulary, she answered. I'd rather not speak it. He considered her profile, the way lamplight made her human and more. When this is over, he said, careful, and the roads go quiet, what do you keep? Windows that face the path I chose, she said, a smile tucked in the words. And a stove that remembers winter, he added. And a man who knocks when he comes to the door, she finished, meeting his eyes. Heat rolled through his gaze, not hungry, not sated, promise set to a low flame. He stood before he could say something that would change the weather. Dawn, he said lightly, and left her with the sound of water arguing convincingly for mercy. The road didn't wait. Dawn scraped pale gold across Red Bank's roofs, and already murmurs ran ahead of them like dogs on a hunt. Mira walked with the cadre through streets that felt different than the night before, lighter, unsettled but hopeful. Children pointed. Elders whispered her name as if tasting it for weight. Mira kept her shoulders straight. She knew what it meant to be stared at, and she would not shrink. They passed the outer gates and followed the river north, a track lined with alder and bramble. The air carried ash, faint but real. Wardens burned somewhere close, Lyra said grimly, kneeling to touch the soil. Black flakes stuck to her glove. Not a whole village. A warning fire. Warnings are sermons, Finn added, scanning the trees. They want their story louder than ours. Cashin looked to Mira. And what do we do with stories? We ring truer ones, she answered, surprising herself with the conviction. His nod was small, but it filled her chest like an extra breath. By midday, they found the source, a small chapel in ruins, beams sagged, stone walls cracked by fire. Villagers huddled outside, faces streaked with soot. A woman clutched a baby, rocking as if rhythm alone might keep the world together. Mira stepped forward, circle expanding as if it, too, wanted to comfort. They said the saint was false, a farmer muttered. That only fire purifies. Then they've mistaken ash for truth, Mira replied. She pressed her palms to the blackened threshold. The wood groaned, then quieted. Her light seeped in, not to erase the char but to steady the stone beneath. Where flames had cracked mortar, the glow filled seams like liquid silver. The chapel didn't rise new, but it stopped sagging. A place to breathe, to begin again. The baby laughed suddenly, pure and loud. The sound startled even Mira. Cashin's gaze softened, rare and unguarded. Your work isn't just defense, he murmured. It is restoration. Mira straightened, ash smudging her apron. Then we'll keep restoring until their fires look small. Behind them, Lyra drew steel as shadows shifted. More wardens. Not a mob, not yet, but scouts with fire kettles strapped to their backs. Cashin moved to meet them, but Mira touched his arm. Let me try words first. He hesitated, then gave the faintest nod. She stepped into the path, light circling her ankles, voice calm but iron. You can drop your fire here and leave. Or carry it back and tell your captains this ground has already healed. Your choice. The leader scoffed, but his hand tightened on the strap as though the flames weighed heavier. Behind him, two of the younger men exchanged glances, uncertain. Cassian waited, still as judgment. Lyra's blade caught Dawn. Mira did not move. The choice hung, balanced on something older than orders. The warden leader spat into the dirt. You think mercy buys you safety? This fire was blessed. It will return. He signaled, and the group turned, not attacking, but retreating with brittle pride. Myra's circle pulsed once, steady, as if agreeing, retreat was enough. You gave them a crack, Cassian said once they were gone. Cracks spread faster than sermons. Not cracks, Mira corrected. Choices. She didn't look at him, but she felt his approval anyway. They worked with the villagers until dusk, hauling beams, clearing ash, steadying walls. Myra's palms glowed raw by nightfall, not from battle but from persistence. When the last stone was set, the farmers lit lanterns inside the half-ruined chapel. The flame was gentle, not devouring. One of them pressed a jar of honey into Myra's hands. You made the ground listen again, he said simply. When they finally camped in the woods, Mira sat apart for a while, staring at her hands. They shook not from fear but from carrying too much energy. Cassian joined her silently, lowering himself onto the log beside her. You can't mend everything at once, he said quietly. I know. She flexed her fingers. But if I stop, it feels like the fire wins. His gaze was steady, ember-red in the dim light. Fire wins when it convinces you to burn yourself out. He reached, not to take, but to cover her hand with his. Warmth steadied warmth. You're not alone in this. Not anymore. For a long moment neither moved. The forest hummed with night insects, the campfire breathed, and Mira let herself lean just slightly into his shoulder. It wasn't surrender. It was rest. And it felt like something she had been missing long before the wardens ever knocked. Dawn found them on the ridge, the valley below washed clean in gold. Smoke still rose from old fires, but in the clear light it looked thin, almost embarrassed. Mira stood with the cadre, the quilt square in her satchel warm against her back. Cassian stepped beside her, eyes on the horizon, and said nothing at first. At last he asked softly, And now, Mira of the North Road, what will you choose? She breathed in the morning, the weight of silence, the promise of noise. Not hiding, she answered. Not anymore. He smiled then, brief but true. Together, they turned toward the road that waited, not as fugitives, not as outcasts, but as keepers of a light the wardens could never burn away. The story ended not with battle, but with choice, and the certainty that the path ahead would carry both of their names.